August 1939. In the heart of the Kremlin, two of the most ruthless ideologies on earth set aside their hatred to sign a document that would doom the world to war. Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, sworn enemies, became partners in crime. For the Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin, this was the ultimate strategic masterstroke. But for Adolf Hitler, it was the ultimate act of deception. This is the story of Operation Barbarossa, not just as a military campaign, but as an act of betrayal so profound it would bring the world's most powerful dictator to the brink of a total mental and political collapse. This is the story of the day Hitler broke Stalin's heart. To understand the depth of this betrayal, we must first understand the man it was inflicted upon. Joseph Stalin was not just a tyrant, he saw himself as a grandmaster of geopolitical chess. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of 1939 was, in his mind, his greatest move. By signing a non-aggression treaty with his Nazi rival, he believed he had achieved multiple victories at once. He had bought precious time to continue rebuilding the Red Army, an army he himself had decimated in his paranoid purges of the late 1930s. Secret protocols in the pact allowed him to expand the Soviet Empire, swallowing eastern Poland, the Baltic states, and parts of Romania, creating a vast buffer zone to protect the motherland. The partnership was chillingly effective. As Hitler's panzers rolled into Poland from the west, the Red Army invaded from the east, carving up the nation between them. While the world was horrified, Stalin reaped the benefits. The pact was a license for conquest, and it lulled him into a false sense of security. Economically, the two powers became deeply intertwined. The Soviet Union shipped a steady stream of vital resources, oil, grain, and rubber, to Germany, directly fueling the Nazi war machine as it conquered Denmark, Norway, and France. In return, the Soviets received finished German industrial goods and advanced military technology. To any outside observer, it was a thriving, if monstrous, alliance. For Stalin, it was proof that he could do business with anyone, even the devil, and come out ahead. But most importantly, Stalin believed he had cleverly turned the capitalist and fascist powers against each other. He envisioned a long, bloody war in the West that would exhaust both Germany and the Allies, leaving the Soviet Union to pick up the pieces as the dominant power in Europe. While Hitler was busy with France and Britain, the USSR would grow stronger. Stalin's trust was not in Hitler's word, but in his own cynical calculation that the pact was too strategically beneficial for Hitler to break. He saw himself not as Hitler's friend, but as his temporary and far more intelligent partner. This illusion of security, this supreme confidence in his own foresight, would become his single greatest vulnerability. As 1940 turned to 1941, the warnings began to trickle in. They came from everywhere. Richard Sorge, a Soviet master spy embedded in the German embassy in Tokyo, provided a precise date for a German attack. Winston Churchill, a lifelong anti-communist, personally sent a warning to Stalin, pleading with him to recognize the German military buildup on his border. Soviet border guards reported a massive, unprecedented concentration of German divisions, tanks, and aircraft just across the line. The evidence was overwhelming, yet Stalin refused to see it. The intelligence became increasingly specific and alarming. Defecting German soldiers crossed the border with tales of an imminent invasion. The chief of Soviet military intelligence, General Philip Golikov, presented Stalin with detailed reports of the Wehrmacht's movements, but he disastrously downplayed their significance, afraid of angering the dictator with unwelcome news. Even Stalin's own naval commander, Admiral Kuznetsov, put the entire Soviet fleet on high alert on his own initiative just hours before the attack, a move that likely saved it from annihilation but was a clear act of defiance against Stalin's policy of inaction. The air was thick with warnings, but Stalin had constructed an echo chamber around himself where any information that contradicted his own worldview was dismissed as a provocation. Why did this master of paranoia suddenly seem so blind? The answer lies in the twisted corridors of his own mind. He was so convinced of his own genius in signing the pact that he interpreted every warning as a trick. Churchill's warning, he believed, was a desperate British ploy to drag the Soviet Union into their war with Germany. The reports from his own spies he dismissed as disinformation fed to them by Western intelligence. He was pathologically suspicious of everyone, except it seemed the one man he should have feared the most. To order a full mobilization based on these warnings would, in his mind, be a sign of panic. It could even be seen by Hitler as a provocation, giving him an excuse to attack. Stalin, the Grand Master, would not be baited. He held his nerve, convinced he was one step ahead. His pride, his ego, and his belief in his own infallible judgment had become a wall, preventing him from seeing the terrible truth. At 3:15 a.m. on the 22nd of June, 1941, that wall came crashing down. Operation Barbarossa was unleashed. Over 3 million German soldiers, the largest invasion force in human history, surged across the border. The sheer scale and fury of the attack were beyond anything the world had ever seen. The Luftwaffe annihilated the unprepared Soviet Air Force on the ground within hours. Panzer divisions sliced through the front lines, beginning a series of colossal encirclements that would capture millions of Soviet soldiers. The speed, the violence, the sheer totality of the betrayal were a shock to the entire Soviet system. But for one man, the shock was deeply personal. In the Kremlin, the initial reports were met with disbelief. Stalin was stunned into a state of paralysis. The man who micromanaged every aspect of the Soviet state, who held the lives of millions in his hands, was suddenly absent. He retreated to his dacha outside Moscow, refusing to speak to his generals, refusing to address the nation. For several critical days, as the German army tore his country apart, the Soviet Union was effectively leaderless. Accounts from inside his inner circle, later revealed by Khrushchev, paint a picture of a man utterly broken. He was convinced his own people and his inner circle would arrest him for his catastrophic failure of judgment. The master strategist had been played for a fool, and the humiliation was absolute. This was the moment Stalin's heart, the cold, calculating core of his pride and strategic self-image, was broken. The betrayal had not just shattered his country's defenses, it had shattered his own perception of himself as the infallible leader. His trust in his own judgment was gone. The nation he had built through terror and iron will was on the brink of collapse, and he, its architect, was responsible. The devastation was not just on the map, it was inside his own mind. When he finally emerged from his seclusion, it was as a changed man. On July 3rd, 11 days after the invasion began, he addressed the Soviet people on the radio. The famously aloof and distant tyrant was gone. In his place was a voice filled with a strange mix of desperation and gravity. He did not refer to the people as comrades, his usual Bolshevik term. Instead, he called them brothers and sisters, my friends. It was an unprecedented appeal, a cry for unity from a man who had been pushed to the very edge of the abyss. He acknowledged the terrible danger, implementing a brutal, scorched earth policy, a painful necessity that further illustrated the catastrophe. The infallible God had been revealed as a fallible man. From the ashes of this personal crisis, a new Stalin was forged. The humiliation and paranoia of the betrayal would shape every decision he made for the rest of the war. He reasserted control with absolute brutality, purging generals he deemed incompetent and sending millions to their deaths with his infamous "not a step back" order. The man who had once trusted in a cynical pact would now trust no one. His paranoia, once a character flaw, now became the central organizing principle of the Soviet war effort. He would recover and he would ultimately triumph, but the scars of June 22nd would never heal. The trust was broken forever. The betrayal had crushed the man, but in doing so, it had unleashed a monster of even greater, more desperate resolve, a resolve that would ultimately consume the very men who had dared to break him. The story of Barbarossa's first day is a powerful reminder that history is driven not just by armies and economics, but by the egos, fears, and fatal flaws of the leaders who command them. If you believe these deep dives into the psychological side of warfare are crucial to understanding our past, please support our channel by subscribing and clicking the notification bell so you don't miss our next investigation.